Hello and welcome to the birthing of Grin Reaping by Rod Carley. My name's Heather Campbell and I'm the publisher with Latitude 46 and we're located in Sudbury. And our mandate is to publish Northern Ontario authors or Northern Ontario stories. And Rod is actually one of the first authors we published with A Matter of Will. And now we're on number 3. So congratulations. Yes. I'm sure there's more. But welcome. And I'm not going to take too much longer to talk about what we're doing, but get the conversation going between Kim and Rod. So we've asked Kim from Sudbury to join us as the question asker of Rod. And Kim is published 5 books of poetry. And she's a former Greater Sudbury Poet Laureate. And
but the first woman poet laureate of Sudbury, which is important.
That's true, yes. And she's the Ontario rep for Writers Union of Canada and does a lot of work with writers. So Rod is glad to have Kim join him today. So I'll hand the mic over to Kim.
Thanks, Heather.
And I'm just going to say a few more things about Kim, so you know. She's got a 6th volume, her 6th volume of poetry is coming out this fall, right? And it's Emptying the Ocean.
Yes.
And Heather mentioned Kim is now the Ontario representative for the Writers Union of Canada. And she's been doing that now the past 2 years. And she does an amazing job. And one of her mandates is to get Northern Ontario heard at the table.
That's true.
And that's a big part of her work. And she does an amazing job of that, soliciting dialogue and getting all of us, especially through COVID, on our meetings and doing readings and communicating. And you've done a wonderful job of opening all that up. And that's one reason I wanted Kim to be here, is she's just a beautiful writer. Her poetry is wonderful. And we thought we'd have sort of just a really relaxed, flowy interview, and then we're going to open up to questions, and I'm going to do a reading at some point and all sorts of stuff like that. Okay? But thank you all for being here. Wow, this is amazing to have the room full, and thank you all for out there who are watching out in the ether. I really appreciate you there as well.
All right, so tell me if this is okay. You're all right with this? All right, so I'm just going to ask that you have some thank yous, I'm sure, with new books. We're always thanking people, so
yeah.
Go ahead.
I want to thank, first off, Jamie and Average Joe's for donating the room for the launch. And a big thank you to Thomas Brown right there. And Ryan Velduiz, I love that, Velduiz, of Buzzmasters for live streaming our launch tonight. And also, they've been producing and broadcasting my Rod Read show for the past 3 months, and it was their initiative, so thank you guys for being here. This collection is dedicated to my brother Greg, my younger brother, who kind of personifies generosity. And he has managed to recreate my late mother's apple pie to such perfection that I swear she's sitting in the kitchen with us. And I think she is. I do. My wife Marion, who keeps me grounded, my first reader and my greatest critic. Whoop. And without her support, I'd just be tossing words out the window. Okay? And all of you, thank you, all my friends that are here, and family aren't here, but this is for friends and family that are here and no longer with us. I can say there's a bit of all of you in these tales. They're all these hybrid characters. So you've all influenced my life, and you've spilled with ink on these pages. Okay? I want to thank Kevin Hoffman right there, the brilliant Kevin Hoffman, who created an incredible video book trailer for Grin Reaping. He did one for Kinmount. This guy's so talented. He's a joy to work with. So Kev, thank you, as always, man. Okay? I want to thank the Ontario Arts Council for their recommender for writers grants, and ECW Press in Toronto for recommending Grin Reaping for a grant. I also want to thank Cloud Lake Literary, Blank Spaces magazine, and the Carter V. Cooper short fiction anthology, where 3 of these stories were previously published. And I need to thank Kelsey Rule and On the Edge Fringe, because 2 of the stories in their development I read virtually for Fringe, and I really appreciate giving me that venue for that. Okay? Grin Reaping is also dedicated in memory of a good friend, John Batchelor. And he read all these stories in early incarnations. He provided insightful feedback over a dram or two, of course. And John was really looking forward to the release of this collection, but he never lived to see it. So in some ways, tonight's for him. The second John I want to thank is John Metcalf, who edited the collection and my first novel. John's old school. You do everything by mail and phone. He doesn't use email. He doesn't have a cell phone. He's great, but he has beautiful penmanship. So I always look forward when you get his edits in the mail from him. And it was his big-heartedness and astute suggestions, belief in the collection that helped shape it. And he was my mentor when I did my first book. He edited it, and I learned under him at the Humber School for Writers. So that's important. I also have to say a quick thank you to Mitchell Govan, who's now Dr. Mitchell Govan. He got his PhD a few days ago. And he did some astute fine-tuning before publication. He also edited Kinmount. And many of you do theater with me, but the writer-editor relationship is much like the director-actor relationship. It really depends on a really honest and healthy trust back and forth. And I've been fortunate in both counts with Mitchell and John. I'm grateful for the camaraderie of other authors. In particular, I got to acknowledge Terry Fallis, who graciously offered to write the front cover blurb, as well as Ali Bryan, Amy Jones, Ian Ferguson, Randall Granger, Susan Juby, and Sean Raycroft, who all read the book in advance and provided advance reviews. And finally, a very special thanks to Latitude 46 Publishing and Heather Campbell for your continued faith and support in my work. And Northern Ontario owes you a great debt. So thank you. Thank you.
All right, that was so lovely. I want to thank you for asking me to do this because I've been rep for the Writers Union for 2 years, and it's been pandemic-ville, so I've not been out to the cities and towns where writers live. So this is my first outing as rep in the province outside of Sudbury, so thank you for that. Thank you, Heather, for asking me as well. I would like you, if you don't mind, to start with a reading.
Okay.
You all don't have books yet, do you?
No, this is a surprise.
You know what? That's better, actually, because then you just sort of want to buy it more, don't you? And not just one copy, but 2, 3, 4 copies for Christmas and all of that stuff. There you go.
All right, so, and I'll get into talking a bit about the book and characters. So, and I've done a few readings on Rod Reads and for Fringe, so I wanted to make sure I read something that no one here has heard yet, at any way. And one of the, everyone knows I like writing humor, and a lot of this book is taking serious topics and seeing, can you write it with a humorous look? And when one says climate change, one doesn't start laughing immediately, right? We don't go, oh, that's so funny, But I attempted to write a story where I try to approach climate change with humor. Not the actual, impending doom, but around it, okay? So I thought what I'd do is do a very short reading from that story. It's the first few pages that get into it, that give the feel of it. And the story is, and the character I'm reading is the central character of the book. I'll talk about it a little later, Rudy Boyle, and all the stories are from his first person, okay? The rest will explain itself. And the story is called Kookaburra Sits in the Old Burnt Tree. You never know what you'll think about on a winter morning jog. One Saturday in early January, I was out huffing and puffing and found unwanted thoughts of the apocalypse popping into my head. Nothing too heavy, just the destruction of the earth and every living thing on it. Specifically, I was thinking about climate change, the hot topic. The global calamity that's threatening to raise temperatures and sea levels, increase the intensity of storms, droughts, forest fires, potentially destroy civilization, and make Northern Ontario winters bearable. I want to do something about climate change, but as I ran lumbering along to nowhere in particular, imagining how I would survive in an apocalyptic wasteland on a stockpile of Spam and Nutella, I knew that the pictures on social media of polar bears trapped on melting ice aren't working. Most people don't even realize how bad climate change is going to get. Oh, they know glaciers are melting, they know weather can be weird, but they don't get it. They haven't spent time paying attention to climate research. My niece Esther spends that time. She can tell us a thing or 12,000 about it. Esther is the only child of my sister Evie and her husband Roger. Esther wants to be reincarnated as a renewable energy resource for climate, okay? And to combat climate change. And last Christmas, she asked her parents for a climate refugee. Moreover, she just launched a GoFundMe page to raise funds to support edible six-pack rings that sea turtles can ingest without dying. Did I mention my niece is only 13 years old? According to Esther, the global warming outlook is much, much worse than originally predicted, which is pretty bad when they originally predicted it would destroy the planet. Prompted for my concern for my niece's future, I decided to read some legitimate climate research. 2 nights later, I lay awake imagining the world turning into a wasteland. I walked down the street with Viggo Mortensen pushing a shopping cart. In another nightmare, I sported a mohawk, wearing leather and fighting Mel Gibson for gasoline. What I do know is we can't let the Earth disintegrate into some real-life version of Waterworld. Water covers everything, and Kevin Costner is a half fish who never once picks up a baseball. I sat through it twice in the 90s. I had to make sure it was that bad. I'd rather not relive that terrible apocalyptic mess of a movie for a third time. The IT guy at the college thinks technology will protect us from the environmental crisis. Imagine the not-too-distant future, he says. Anti-hurricane missiles and ice cap rebuilding apps. Just last month, A&W announced its new Beyond meat burger. The off Broadway equivalent of eating a shred of lettuce. The soothsayers of ancient Rome have become today's climate scientists. But society has reached a saturation point for gloomy and threatening science-centered discussions. The real question for those concerned about climate change should be how to make it as interesting as Leonardo DiCaprio's dating life. If it weren't for an iceberg sinking the Titanic, we wouldn't have the movie that launched Leo into stardom. It's little wonder he's so passionate about climate change. He owes his entire career to an iceberg. Climate change will not be easy to solve. This isn't people picking up after their pets. Tackling climate change requires a concerted effort bigger than winning World War II, bigger than the moon landing, bigger than the 4-story mural of Greta Thunberg in San Francisco, painted by a group of her teenage fans. My niece, Esther, loves Greta. She has pictures of Greta plastered on her bedroom walls. She wears her hair in identical braids. If she could, Esther would change her surname to Thunberg. She's even taking Swedish lessons. Esther is frustrated by my seeming lack of basic knowledge. She gave me a science lesson last weekend when Neil and I were in the city to celebrate my sister Evie's 55th birthday. I haven't visited an ashram before, but Evie's home sure smells like what I imagined one to smell like. Healing oils drip on lamp bulbs. Sacred herb incense smokes in every room, and there's enough smoldering frankincense to give Buddha an asthma attack. Evie goes to yoga 5 classes a week. She plans vegan meals a month in advance. I eat cake over the sink so I don't get crumbs in my bed. Evie's home has all white interiors. Breathing rooms, she calls them. Her Scandinavian overstatement is no understatement. Only the planters and plant stands add a splash of color. My sister rearranges the furniture daily in order to refresh the energy of the house. Everything in its proper place, no clutter, except for Evie's second husband, Roger. A game of acid-induced Pictionary ended my sister's first marriage. She drew a feather and her husband thought it was a leaf. It cost him the game and their marriage. Roger is a harried, overworked estate lawyer with a bad haircut and a penchant for death, particularly life insurance policies. He's actually addicted to them. It's the fear of the unknown future written down and made known. Where there's a will, there's 500 relatives, he jokes wearily. Roger does most of the cooking out of fear of getting accidental food poisoning from Evie. Oh, I feel for Roger trying to satisfy my sister's ever-changing diets and his daughter's ever-shifting interests. Last year, Esther wanted to be a Buddhist. Reincarnation was making a comeback. The year before, a wizardry student at Hogwarts, he had to track down a dragon scale for her for Christmas. Roger's been suffering from chronic existential dread since the 1970s. On the outside, he looks relatively normal, But on the inside, he's trapped on the Titanic. He blames his illness on globalization. When you see how other people are living in horrible places like Syria, but you're still pissed off that the barista forgot to add ginger to your ginger latte, eventually the cognitive distance gets to you. He said over a latte at Starbucks last Christmas, it's like, you know your latte is meaningless in the face of limitless global supply of suffering, but you're still mad. He stared into his artfully branded coffee cup for a while, and I couldn't help but wonder if the frothy beverage was staring back at him. If anxiety was a superpower, Roger would be so powerful he'd make Superman look like Aquaman. When I was 8 years old, I used to wet the bed. I lay awake at night wondering if there were bathrooms at Atlantis, or did Aquaman just swim around pissing freely. Later, I thought my father was secretly Aquaman, and then I just realized he liked taking us to Red Lobster. With the likely probability that we'll all wind up underwater, Aquaman could very well solve the problem, except for the fact that he's a comic book character and bound by no actual laws of reason, physics, or reality. The stress finally got to Roger, and he bought himself an emotional support turkey. Mr. Gobble, as named by Esther, is a royal palm, a breed not known for its tastiness, but one that could easily make the cover of People's sexiest poultry issue. His plumage is primarily white, but many of his feathers are accented with a tip of jet black, giving him a Frito Kahlo vibe. Now, usually, the only turkey you see in a commercial airliner is the kind that's sandwiched between two slices of bread. Roger and Mr. Gobble made headlines when they boarded an Air Canada flight together last autumn. Domestic turkeys can only fly on jets, otherwise they're flightless. I learned that watching the Thanksgiving episode of WKRP in Cincinnati. Roger pushed Mr. Gobble through Pearson International Airport in a wheelchair. You're taking this bird on board with you? The flight attendant asked, unable to mask her surprise. Yes, I am, Roger replied with a frozen smile. He handed the young woman 2 boarding passes. Mr. Gobble flapped his wings in distress, dispensing a good amount of down into the air, and let loose a series of loud, rapid, gurgling sounds, not unlike the electronic beeps that Roger's hybrid car makes when he's too close to the curb. Did you talk to the airline? The attendant asked. Yes, Roger lied. Does your turkey have all his shots? Yes, Robert proceeded to show her a list of Mr. Gobble's immunizations. And he has a 5-star Thanksgiving life insurance policy. Do you need to see that? The attendant shook her head, wishing she'd stayed in college. How much does he weigh? Asked the man in line behind Roger, no doubt envisioning Mr. Gobble on a plate with a side of cranberry sauce. Passengers gathered on the aisle taking selfies with Mr. Gobble until he snapped. Ooh, Easy, boy, Roger whispered to calm the turkey down. He's my therapy animal, he explained to the other flight attendant. His smile hardened. Do you want to see the letter from my therapist? The flight attendant quickly ushered Roger and Mr. Gobble down the aisle. Is that a real turkey? A woman asked as they passed by her. Soon the jet was taxiing down the runway. Mr. Gobble sat in the window seat, nervously tucking and untucking his wings, eyes fixed on the air traffic control tower. Easy, buddy, said Roger, sliding in beside his turkey, anxiously crossing and uncrossing his legs. What kind of emotional support do you get from him? Asked the aisle seat passenger. Mr. Gobble gobbled loudly. Ooh. It sounds like your emotional support animal could use an emotional support animal, the passenger snorted. Depending on his mood, a turkey's head and neck will either turn red, white, or blue if overly excited, or a combination of all three if really upset. Mr. Gobble's head turned purple. He doesn't look so good, said the passenger. He motioned to a flight attendant. Mr. Gobble started to shake his head and bang it against the glass. Is he having a seizure? The passenger asked. The flight crew determined Mr. Gobble was too stressed to fly. So Roger and his emotional support turkey were forced to disembark the plane. Roger and Mr. Gobble were the subject of social media jokes and memes for months. Okay, I'm pulling page.
His endings are very good in this book. and we're going to talk about that later. But I want to just talk about your bio because I didn't read it, but I will just mention I think it's impressive. I know it's impressive. Satirists are hard to come by as writers, and they aren't always successful, and you are. So this is your third novel. I'm sure you all have copies of the other two because you're friends and families. You know about Kinmount and A Matter of Will, both by Latitude 46. But I think it's just so amazing. I mean, it's so cool that you were in the Carter B. Cooper Award, right? Like, that's a big deal in Canadian lit.
And that was a story called The Land of the Lizard People, which is in the collection, yeah.
How did that feel?
It was amazing, yeah.
Yeah.
The thing with any of these, for writing contests is that you throw it out there and you don't hear for like a year.
That's right.
So anytime you hear anything, it's a surprise because you forgot you did it.
Yeah.
It is, because you have to. It's like acting. You do an audition, right, Rob? And you do it, and you have to forget you did it. And it's kind of like anything you send your writing out to, you got to forget because you're not going to hear for it, for a very long time.
No, and sometimes you forget and then you win or you place
Yeah.
and you're thinking that's nuts, right?
Yeah. And then when did I submit that?
That's
That
right.
kind of thing, yeah.
So just to say that, you're up there now, which is I think amazing because you're from the north as well, to be honest. I'm sure you would agree, I would hope. Okay, good. So this book is really lovely. I love short stories. I write some of them, but what I think is beautiful about this book, and I talked to you about this the other day when we talked, was you're dealing with grief, but in a way that is compassionate and witty and all of this beautiful stuff that's happening. But the one thing that I noticed, and of course you're going to talk about it, I hope, is that you've got the ghost of Salinger in here. You even name some of these animals in tribute to him. So I wanted you to share how you were so influenced by his work
Sure.
as a young man and writer, and how you've carried him and his work through your life so far.
Okay. So I think that when I was in high school, 18, 19, and I was consumed with a thirst for knowledge and reading books. And that's when I discovered the works of J.D. Salinger, right? And immediately I fell in love with his fictional black family in his stories, right? And they were heroes to me. They became they were real. They were these quirky role models living in this apartment in New York City on the Upper East Side. And I wanted to be a writer like Zooey, an actor like Zooey, and a writer like Buddy, and a groomer like Seymour, right? But these were not the career choices being offered by my high school guidance counselor at Rocket Clinton Institute, who was sort of saying, go be a lawyer, right? And there are 7 siblings in the fictional Glass family that Salinger created. And Salinger himself only had one older sister. So he wrote the Glass family to fill that void. Similarly, I only have one younger brother, my brother Greg. And I'd always wanted to have, I was always jealous of my friends that came from large families and had this massive dinner table talking, which I didn't have. So initially I wanted to create this collection to create some sense of family and brothers and sisters, and it began there. And then that led to the central character, Rudy Boyle, who was a college English teacher, a frustrated college English teacher, stuck both in middle age and the middle of his siblings, and how he could sort of take the strangeness of his everyday life and turn it into some kind of exaggerated, like home movie prose, and tackle a whole massive topics with a very kind of self-deprecating wit and look at life, and from the sublime to the ridiculousness, and play around with his family.
Okay.
Salinger is in the book.
Yes.
Only it's not the JD.
No.
Rudy has a Jack Russell Terrier named Salinger, but he did buy him from a breeder in Cornish, New Hampshire.
Well, do you have another pet in here named after?
Yes, there's a cat named Franny.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it's lovely. And I said to you too, I don't know if anyone in here has read Olive Kitteridge by Elizabeth Strout. It's a wonderful collection of stories woven into a novella almost, and it reminds me a lot, yours reminds me a lot of that. So anyway, there's another book to go read if you like collected short stories that have links within them. I wanted also to ask you about stigma and grief, because people avoid it so often. And I think most writers harness the power of grief and loss and channel it into their work. Usually when we speak with one another, that happens. We talk about that. We're weird that way. It's obvious that's the case here in this book. I mean, the title in I'm hoping you will explain a bit about, but you've dealt with something really difficult by using humor, and black humor and satire in particular is so complex and beautiful. If you do it well. If you don't do it well, it just sinks and it sucks, right? But you've not done that. You're stellar at it. That's what I'm saying. I think it's really impressive what you've done here. I couldn't do it. What makes this different than other satirical books you've written so far, given the content and the topic?
Okay. Out of the gate, first off, it's got nothing to do with the theater. When my first 2 books do the theater.
Yes. But they were funny.
But they were funny. Oh, yeah.
Yes, so that's my point.
Yeah, it's still funny,
Yes.
yes. And I'm writing this one in the voice of Rudy Boyle, but from the first person.
Yes.
So that was something I really wanted to do, so that for that familiarity. And it's interesting how when I began writing the collections I was sharing earlier, it was more looking at some of these life stories through Rudy's eyes, right, and how he saw the world. And I've been working on this collection it took me 5 years to write it, right, within my life. And over the course of those 5 years, I lost both my parents and a few dear friends and others. So suddenly that began to inform the writing as I was writing it. And so what had happened is that grief and loss became the foundation for the collection of short stories, right? That's the firmament, that it's the bedrock it's based on, right? And you know, as that's something everyone here in common has, is we've all lost someone, we've all experienced grief, but how we use humor to cope. We use humor as a mechanism to stay on the planet. It keeps us from jumping off bridges. It's the kind of exchange we all use, and we use it every day, inject it every day. And so I needed to do with these stories was write with a place of humor, right? And what I mean, and so you're not going to read the book and, oh, every chapter someone dies. It's not that at all, right? It just means that there are deaths within the book, and all the characters have to deal with it, and it has a trickle-down effect. And it's so how you keep going and how you keep, embracing life and using humor, right? And I think I was sharing with you, and I found it interesting myself. I think about dying more, not in a maudlin way, but more in that Buddhist kind of way, that and feeling a bit more comfortable about it, and not as afraid about it. And I think that's an interesting way to sit in it. And I think writing these stories too and addressing it with humor, right? It makes it real, because it is real, and it's going to happen to us all. But while we're here, what do? We laugh. We got to laugh about things, right? And we got to get on with it, right? And that's what these characters do, right? Like we all do.
Okay, good. For me, satire is really hard to write. We share Terry Fallis as a friend, and I took a course with him last year and thought, I won't even manage this course. There's so much to put into it when you think of the various techniques that you have to use, which I had no idea about till I took the course. Now I can read satire and see the amount of work that goes into it. I'm wondering why. I think that some of the smartest people actually write satire. You have to be super intelligent and witty and well-read. Why were you drawn to satire? Obviously, you're funny, so that would be part of it. And which writers have influenced you in both reading and writing?
Okay. So I'll try to answer that in 3 parts. So satire, and I won't turn this into a theater history lesson about going back to the ancient Roman satyr plays that they did after the Greek tragedies, kind of like how Spaceballs sent up all the Star Wars trilogy, right? Okay, for all you, okay, may the force be with you out there, okay? But that whole idea of, of satire, right, is, there's dark satire, like George Orwell doing Animal Farm is really dark because he's fighting for political change and social change. And then there's lighthearted, more that you're poking fun at institutions, people, politics, and I sort of fit into that vein, kind of using humor a bit like a court jester. But, and I think for me, when I was a kid growing up in Brockville, I was a shy kid, and I did, and I watched, and I think that's all Canadians. I mean, look at our neighbor to the south, North America, right, which is a megalomaniac, right? They don't spend a lot of time navel gazing, right? And so I think by having that neighbor, Canadians are naturally observers, we're adapters, we're chroniclers. So I did a lot of, I watched people in my life growing up, and I saw things that I thought were unjust, and at my school and things around me. And so I began to get that spirit of doing theater and writing as a way to address that. And the old adage, you get more humor, or you get more flies with sugar, right? Or shadflies if they had mouths, right? You can deal with a serious topic with humor and sometimes get that across to an audience in a way that's easier to enjoy while getting that going on in their mind. So that's where it comes from me. And I think the first great influences for me were Mordecai Richler.
Yes. Okay.
I loved Richler, right, in high school, and he was one of the greatest satirists that this country's ever produced. And then I'm also a big fan of David Sedaris. Now, Sedaris writes autobiographical stories about his own family, and he pokes fun at everything, right? And he's darkly funny. And I remember when I first read Me Talk Pretty one day. I mean, if you haven't read it, oh my gosh, I was laughing out loud. It's just so funny, right? As he goes off to France to try to learn to speak French, and what happens to him. So, and that stuck with me, and it's just been growing within me. Yeah, and that's.
What's your favorite Richler novel?
My favorite Richler novel is Solomon Gursky Was Here.
Oh, I like Barney's version
I
for
like
the
Barney's version
ending.
too, but I do like I like the. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I also really love that you use magic realism because I thought I've never seen that with satire before, and I read a heck of a lot. Why and how are you drawn to magic realism? I think it's a beautiful style, hard to execute as a writer. I think you can use it well or not use it. You shouldn't use it if you can't use it well. You do it beautifully. Why are you drawn to it in particular? Who influences you again for that? How does it work in this book? I know these are all kind of linked questions. In terms of loss. So I'm thinking of course, The Lift, which is the opening story. If you read, we have to read The Lift first. It's just gorgeous. And then those characters sort of come back as ghostly figures later in the stories in the book. And they're just lovely that you bring them back in, right?
Yeah,
so all of that I'm curious about.
Okay. Yeah, I won't give away I won't ruin the plot, what happens in The Lift. I think it comes down to paraphrase the Bard, when Hamlet says to Horatio, there's more things on heaven and earth that are dreamt of in your philosophy. And I believe that. I mean, there's here, but there's all what's waiting on the other side. And I think if you're open to it, you get clues, you get signposts, and these moments happen that you can't explain. I mean, we can talk about deja vu as being like a short circuit of the brain, or is it something else, right?
Yes.
And I'm fascinated by that, because I fully believe that there's all sorts of stuff happening up there that we have no idea. So I believe in mysticism. And I've had moments in my life, and I think I was just talking to Donna Sinclair at a writers gathering about mysticism a few nights ago. And so that's part of how I view life. And I don't believe there's any coincidences. Things happen, and probably at some point we'll figure out why. But right now, so I dabble my toes in that all the time. And so in The Matter of Will, it was dealing with the fairies in Newfoundland, and then St. Peter's voice channeling through a guy named Billy Blight. And then in Kinmount, there was a Ouija sequence they had, which the central character Dave Middleton tried to explain off about it had to be energy and bad, cross currents, and so they all kind of accepted it. But on a certain level, really, So as an author, I didn't take a stand. I just left it out there because that's the thing with possibilities, right? In this story, The Lift that you're talking about,
Love it.
it's. Magic realism is that point where I believe it's kind of like writing good science fiction, I think, is if you can set up a plausible reality for your characters, right? And your reader's going along, and then suddenly this happens to the character. Oh, but I've bought into that reality. You go on the ride, right? And so that's what I like doing. And so I like surprising the reader, and it surprises me too, and it's beautiful. And I think sometimes, especially with The Lift, I think there's a lot in there that is wish fulfillment on my part. That I would like these things to happen in life for people around me when those little moments, those magical moments happen, right? And I think as we get older, they become even more a part of our realities, right? And they become that much more, on the horizon and thought about.
Did you know it was going to be the first story in the collection?
Yes.
When and how, and because it's just so.
I knew because it's where we get a sense of Rudy's voice, and we get a sense of his twin brother Jonah. And you get the sense of the older brother Larry. So you get his family in that you get his family in that story, and you see just how close they are. And what's magical in that family, that's just, the older sister says, I always knew our family was different, and I can't say anything about it, you'll know when you read the story, right? But that idea of, that's why I had to go first, because it gave lots of teases, but what may come, but it set the tone for the stories in the book.
Yes, it does. It's gorgeous right there. It couldn't go anywhere else, I don't think, really. It should be first. It's good it is. Every writer has a couple of really important writing mentors. You could probably just think right off the bat who your first one was. Mine was Timothy Finley, so I can't forget him. And they've taught you more and made you a better writer. You don't know until you've had them as mentors, and then sometimes they become friends. So I'm wondering who yours have been.
Well, the most, in terms of as a writer, it would first be John Metcalf. And I wrote in the Humber School for Writers. This would be 12 years ago. And how that program works is they assign you a mentor, right? And I was very lucky. And you get to put your top 3. And I knew of John Metcalf. John Metcalf he's in his mid-80s now. He's like recognized as one of the great short story editors in Canada. And he's very, very funny. And he takes no prisoners, right? And he's tough, right? So that's who I wanted, and I ended up getting him, right? So I can remember I was so excited, and I sent my manuscript. It wasn't called A Matter of Will then, but I'd worked on it for a year, and I sent it to John, right? And then I waited, and I got the letter back from John, and it's like, Dear Rod, I've read your manuscript. Now I want you to sit down and take a few deep breaths. Because after what you read, I'm going to say, you're going to want to pick up my letter and cut it up and burn it and scream my name for days. Right? So basically he said, well, this needs to be entirely restructured, and I think you should think about point of view, and I think you should blah, 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 and he gave me all these things. He said, now think about it. And then when you've come up with some ideas about what you think you might want to do, write me back and we'll begin. And that was like a year and a half and I thought, and I had that, okay. But at that point, and he was right, for the next 2 nights I was just, no. Yeah, he's just an old Brady than nobody. No! Which is often how I react to things, which Marion will say. And then the next day I'm more like, you know what? Yeah. So I did. I went at it, and then it was because of that. I reworked the whole book in third person. I made it now work chronologically, and so anyhow, I did all that, and then I sent it to him, and then he sent a letter back going, "Okay, now we're on the road," and so he could be tough, but he could be so warm and generous, and he knew humor. He would be referencing other writers, and I would madly go and read them. Because some of them I hadn't read, like a lot like Thurber I have it. Others I go, okay. Because he'd be saying that character reminds me of this. Have you read that? And then I went. And so it was lovely, and we really clicked. And then when I finished the program, John did another edit on A Matter of Will, and then I sent that out to publishers and agents, and got a few nice rejection letters, and then nothing. Then that was like 2 years of nothing. And then I was giving up on that, being a writer, who are you kidding, man? And then that's when Latitude came along, and I was at a reading somewhere, and they were there, and then it ding, so I sent the manuscript to Latitude, and there we go, right? So it would be John on the big level. In terms of also making me a better writer, it's my other editor, Mitchell Govan, who happens to also be Heather's son, who is absolutely brilliant. And he knows, and the thing is, he knows how my humor works, and he gets me. So when he's sending me stuff, I trust it, And Mitchell doesn't sugarcoat either. He just says it like it is, right? And it works really, really well. Yeah. So and then the other mentors are people outside of that, are just like other writers that I've gotten to know, because I learn from other writers and reading, right? There's so many, right? The right humor. And then there's people in this room in my life that are mentors. But also, what's wonderful is now I've got mentors that are younger than me, right? Like Josh over there, right? Because everyone should have a younger mentor too, as they're moving into the world of what they do, right? So that you're staying in touch with how the world's working and you're still relevant, right? So I guess the mentors are everywhere.
Yes.
You just got to stay open to them, right?
Well, I think if you're a writer, you should mentor someone.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know, because I didn't really have that when I was younger until I met Mr. Findley.
I didn't
and then
have that till John Metcalf.
yeah, and that is through the Humber School. It's the most amazing option for people, especially when you live in the north, because you're not living in a major literary center, even though you want to think so, right?
Yes.
You have to go outside a bit
Yes.
and then come back.
Yeah.
Okay. As a playwright, I'm curious about how you bring your theater experience and life into your writing, into your practice, in terms of discipline, creativity, and dialogue. That's a big question, but
sure.
theater
Well,
influence.
Peter, okay, right out of the bat, all my writing is dialogue based, and that comes out of working in the theater for like 40 years, you know, from working with actors and from writing a few plays. Also, the essential structure of a director working on a play, an actor in a play, or a playwright is very similar to an author or the writing process, that you've got a central character, a protagonist, right? And hopefully you create a character the audience likes. Then once they like them, you throw everything at them, right? That's to hurt them. And you give them a super objective. They have obstacles they got to overcome. Are they successful? And then they got to overcome those obstacles to try to achieve their objective. That exists in every play, every story, right? That's what we do, right? The other thing is as an actor, you have to have a heightened sense of empathy to know what parts of yourself you're using in a role, right? Because I used to always, you remember the old Star Trek from the 60s, you know, down in Dr. McCoy's sick bay, they had all the levers, and it looked like a really bad 1970s, it looked like a bad 70s stereo system, right? And I used to imagine that as an actor, that all these levers, okay, that's the lever of empathy. I need that for this role. Oh, I don't need that. I don't need malice. I'll put that lever down to 2. So you just play with all the levers in your being and you figure out where that role sits. It's kind of like writing. You need the same sense of empathy when you're going to create characters that are flesh and blood on the page. And so that work as preparing a role as an actor is very similar to writing what I think is believable characters.
Plus, you're also a really great reader. Not every writer is. Some writers really suck at reading out loud, and you don't. Just being honest. Just being honest. If you think of Margaret Atwood, God bless her, I mean, I was
hope you're not watching, Margaret. We love
No.
you.
I love her. But if you listen to her read,
Yes.
she used to read at Laurentian for the birthday dinner, and it's like a monotonous.
Yeah.
Gorgeous writer, though. Okay, so but you don't. I think theater brings that to you too, though, because reading is an art.
Well, that's interesting. Writing, especially writing humor, right? I read my work aloud because it's like when you write a line, it's like music, jazz, whatever. When you know the rhythm is right,
Yes.
or the doom is right, or where it's landing, you hear it, and then you know it's working, right? So that's where speaking it aloud and feeling with it, and you know, and playwrights do it all the time with their work,
Yes.
right? They got to speak it aloud to see if it feels like it's landing authentically. So,
If you can read to your dog, yeah.
Yeah, read to your dog.
I do. Okay. Reading your book, I was thinking about how meticulously structured it is, and I was jealous. So I wondered if you could speak a bit about your process in terms of whether you are a planner or a pantser in terms of writerly talk. The writers will know what I mean. Or if you know your endings before you begin the story, or how the story comes to you, how it arrives in terms of creative process.
Okay. So for the pantser means you just sit down and go, woo! I don't know what I'm going to write. I'm going to see what happens when I sit at the page, right? And for me, I'm a bit too much of a control freak for that. So let's talk about the short stories. So
Yes.
I knew I wanted to write these short stories from this guy, Rudy Boyle. And I knew I wanted to write about his family. So I started to outline what I want to talk about. I knew I wanted to talk about climate change. I knew I wanted to talk about gender. I knew I wanted to talk about Botox. I knew all these different things, different topics. I knew I wanted to address with humor, right? Right? And then silly things, like tuna fish or whatever, coyotes or cottage living, or you know. And so I began to make the list of what the structure of these stories might be, right? And what might happen. And then I began to imagine, well, who would I like to be in my life and my imaginary family?
Yes.
Okay, so I wanted to make sure all the brothers and sisters were very different from each other, right? So then I went there. And so that began to start feeling out. And then, as I said, as I lost my parents, it began to move in the story of, so then I began to shift the outline with the grief. And then it's always evolving because you can throw out your outline, but it gives you a roadmap to start working from. But what I've learned, and this is another thing I learned from the theater, is oftentimes I need to know what the ending is before I can write the beginning. There's a great book by David Ball called Backwards and Forwards, A Technical Guide to Reading Plays. But basically what it says is, if you know where the last domino ends, then you know where the first domino has to begin. So if you read a play backwards, you always know when you're going to direct that very first scene what to do because you know how it has to end. So writing works similarly. If you know how you're going to end, right? I mean, I know John Irving says he always writes the last line of his book first. And then once he has it, he'll go start writing the book. And I can't say I have the last line exactly, but I do know exactly how the story kind of has to end. Or the book I'm working on right now, I knew how it had to end, but I wasn't exactly sure what the last little bit would be, right? So
hard.
it helps though, because it helps when you sit down, because writing is maybe you were inspired one day out of 10. And the rest is just dragging yourself over to your laptop, sitting down for 6 hours and writing. It's the discipline, right? Like anything. And so that's where craft comes in. So when you have an idea of what that outline helps.
Yes.
Because here's what I got to do. The other thing that I find helpful is that when I finish a day, I leave mid-paragraph or mid-sentence.
Oh.
So I don't come in the next day going, what am I starting with? I'm finishing a sentence, so your brain gets rolling right away. Before you know it, you're into it.
You don't forget?
No.
Oh, I
No,
was.
it's kind of like you leave yourself a midi cliffhanger in
Yeah.
a sentence, and you got to finish it the next day.
Okay. So my last question is just a comment too, that I so respect you as a writer, as a fellow writer, just because I think you're so prolific. I was trying to think the other day, I don't know, Heather, you see a lot of writers in your role as a publisher, and I see a lot in Ontario. I can't think of anyone as prolific as you are and as disciplined as you are in terms of turning good pieces of work out, because you could turn out lots and not have good quality work. So I think I work similarly to you in terms of being really disciplined and kind of wildly weird about it. I also like to say wonderful, but that's okay.
No, weird's good. I think weird is pretty accurate.
I'm part Hobbit, so it works out,
it's
you know.
pretty accurate.
So I'm curious as to how you balance all of the ideas that race into your mind. I have a hard time with that because I have so many ideas. I think, oh, you can't start that until you finish this, and don't go there, and you know what I mean? So I wondered if you set timelines for yourself and say, your wife should probably answer this really, to be honest, with certain projects on the slate, or do you dabble between 1 or 2 or 3 in genres, and how long from start to finish?
Okay. Wow. Okay.
Did it take you? You said 5 years.
Yeah. Okay. So. Okay.
All those questions.
Okay. And I don't want to keep people to 10 o'clock. So
I can just bother you later. We can do it on Zoom.
No, it's great. I'll do the show.
Okay.
So this 5 years, right, to do right
Yes.
this. Okay. So. I think initially I wrote about 3 or 4 of the stories. I got the outline done first and wrote 3 or 4 of the stories, right? Meantime, I had finished a draft of Kinmount. So at that point, but Kinmount had gone off to Mitchell, the editor.
So Heather's really excited when she's hearing all of this.
I know. Yeah, but so
I know.
I'd send it off to my editor, right? Then he's going to need a while with it.
Yes.
So that's okay. I can work on Grin Reaping like really, really great right now, right? Now, I'm also teaching full time.
Yes.
So I'm writing on weekends, I'm writing on evenings, I'm writing on my
Yes.
reading weeks.
Yeah.
Last summer, I was writing every day at the cottage. I write on Christmas holidays, right?
Yes.
I mean, something's wrong with me, I know that. There's something, and I know from a kid that I think there's something that you know is missing in you, or otherwise, why do you do all, there's truth.
No, it's something extra, I like to
Thank you.
think.
That's great. That's a great way of putting it. Yes, something extra. Yeah. But there's something, and I think there's actors in this room too that know what makes you desire. Why do you need that attention of an audience? Like,
Right.
why do we need that approval or that validation? So I think there's just like the island of what is it? The island of lost toys or broken toys and Rudolph the Misfit Toys. The island of misfit toys. And I think artists are all like where all the misfits fit. So in some ways, so that discipline's been ingrained in me. My father was a big part of that. Because I've never known a man that worked so hard, but he was like a mechanic, an electrician, and very different than me. But I think I inherited some of his work ethic. And I won't get into this in too much detail, but I do believe that whatever you find yourself relatively what you think you're good at, and and there's no value system. Someone can be an amazing plumber, or someone's an amazing whatever. It's just you've got something you find you're pretty good at, right? I do think you have an obligation to keep at it and do it, because if you do, that's what you're here to do.
Yes.
But you got to do it.
Yeah.
And you got to do it. And I believe that. So and that's been ingrained in me with myself. The theater requires tremendous discipline,
Yes.
right? And especially when you're directing and producing. So that's how I got used to juggling a lot of hats and doing things, because you're directing your show, then you're also producing, you're trying to get the marketing, and I'm sure many people in this room can attest to what that's like, right? You need to be an octopus, right, of all the time. So that has helped me when I juggle, teaching and then working on writing and whatnot. So, but coming back to Grin Reaping. So anyhow, then Mitchell would get back the edits, and then I would spend 6 months working on those edits for Mitchell, right? Then that would go back in for the next bit of fine tuning and back on to Grin Reaping.
Yeah.
COVID helped a bit in that I had a lot more free time and no one was going anywhere.
Yeah.
So you might as well sit in your writing studio and write, because what else are you going to do, right? So that really, right? And winter's great for writing, because I'm not like a
Yes.
winter sports enthusiast. So I'm writing all through the winter, and that helps ward off cabin fever, somewhat. And so then I got to the point where I was finished with the collection, and I said, I need an editor. And that's when I went back to John Metcalf and said, John, would you edit this? And he said, yes, I will. So I sent it to him, and then John had it for a while. Well, he went through and made notes and sent it back. And then and by that point, Kinmap was out. It was out. So when that happened, when John had the final draft of these stories with editing, then I began outlining my next novel.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And I did that for 8 months, and then last summer I was working on the first draft while this was in the final polishing stage. So,
Yeah.
I think that's kind of like...
Oh, it's Cirque du Soleil, though. It
It is
kind
a
of
little bit, I
is.
suppose, but I do enjoy it. I
I
love it,
understand. I do
actually,
too.
yeah.
I enjoy it
Yeah.
too, but it is kind of madness when you start to think about how you manage it logically.
Yes, it is.
Right? But you say, I think part of it is that if you're a storyteller, you can't stop a story from coming.
you can't. No.
You'd probably die. It would be
No.
like not being able to breathe.
Well, I think, is that whole thing about, if a shark stops swimming, it dies, right, or whatever.
Does
right?
it?
Yeah, isn't that right? If a shark stops moving, it dies, can't
So
breathe.
sad.
Okay, someone check that out. Get on their. But I think that's why a shark's always moving. It can't stop. And I think the creative impulse is like that. You've always got to be. And I don't know if I'd be squirrely if I wasn't
Yes.
doing something.
Right. It does keep us balanced. Okay. So Rod would like to open the floor to any questions, if anyone has any questions for him.
Sure.
Not embarrassing ones,
any online
but-
questions? Oh. Sure. While we're waiting for Ryan to find it, anybody? No, everyone's just wants.
Nobody, because they haven't read it yet. That's the problem.
There's cake. Okay, just let you know, there is a reward for all of you being here. There is a Grin Reaping cake that Bella carefully put in the fridge.
Can you tell us about what's coming next?
What's coming next? All right. Well, from Terry.
Hi,
from
Terry.
Hi, Terry. I'm so glad you could be here. Well, Terry, you know this. My cat's written a book. So anyhow, my cat Hilton. We had this conversation a couple years ago, and he's been reading, and he kind of said, I want to adapt The Great Gatsby and make it The Great Catsby, right? And I said, that's a great idea, Hilton. And luckily, when I went to York, I minored in creative writing and cat, so I knew how to translate. So we spent a good year and a half, him writing, me translating, and I put his chapters on social media. So Hilton's book is finished. And Heather and I started talking a bit about it. So Hilton's hoping it might see the light of day in some form, right? And so I'm advocating for Hilton, right? Right. He's not here because Marion will not let us exploit the cat. Okay. So I'm working on that, and I finished the 4th draft of my next novel. It's got a working title called Rough, and it's in the hands of Mitchell, my editor, and he'll be reading through it over the summer. All I will say is it's about writer's block, the chopping block, ghosts, and ghostwriters. But it is humor and satire, and it's probably the biggest canvas I've played with yet. And I've had a great time writing it.
Exciting.
Yeah.
Think of questions here? Yes?
It's not a question, but just so you know, some sharks must swim constantly.
Thank you, Terry.
But some don't.
Some don't. Okay. So
When they stop swimming, they sink to the bottom.
they sink to the bottom. So there we go. Some sharks have to keep swimming, just like some artists have to keep creating and writing.
It's horribly sad. Anyone else?
What's the name of the dog on the cover?
Okay. Now someone asked about the cover. I'm going to talk about. Okay. So I drew this, and then Kevin made it magical in the video. And so this little dog, this is my version of a Jack Russell Terrier, and this is Salinger in the book. And so the cartoon, if you can see it, the little dog he's taking a wee on the Grim Reaper. So it was kind of my idea of this little dog, but that little dog can take the piss out of death. And in many ways, that's what the stories are about, right? Using humor so that we, and so that the Grin Reaper kind of gets his comeuppance in this, right? And the title came out of that Grin Reaping, right? So the idea of, yes, you've got that cowled figure with the scythe, but for everyone reading, hopefully it's going to be a book that you grin and reap from, I'm hoping. Yeah.
Do you have
Thanks,
a
Jeff.
favorite out of all of the short stories?
Oh, no, that's just like saying you have a favorite kid. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like, they're all, like,
love them all separately.
I do. Yeah, they're all very for different reasons, right? They're all there for different reasons, yeah. So,
Tuna on.
Oh, you like
I do.
white tuna on marble rye.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. And the lift.
and the lift. Yeah.
Anyone else? No. Okay. So I'm going to let you go soon right now, but I just want to mention before we stop that it's always a good idea with social media now to take photos of this man and tag him on Instagram, but also tag Latitude 46 Publishing. And so then we spread the word about Northern Ontario writers, not just across Ontario, but across Canada and the world. So if you could do that, but also if you could, when you read the book, do like a 1 or 2 sentence review on Goodreads or Amazon.ca. But I would also suggest, yes, Amazon is fine. I would suggest you support those little independent bookstores, please. That's what my heart goes to as the Writers Union rep here and as a writer. So, they're the indies and we've got to love local. So if you have one, and I believe you do, right? Or
Alice in the Book, man.
yes, so please go and support that little store, okay? All right, thanks. So this is where you get to sign and sell books. This is the exciting
Sign and
part.
sell books, and we're gonna have cake. And there's say it again. That's why you all came.
It's all about the cake.
It's for cake. Is there going to be cake? Let them eat cake anyhow. It means the world to me that you all came out and the support, right? And that's what makes this community such a special community, right? And we all know that, right? And the support that we have in all the many years of what we've been doing. And I want to thank everyone out there in Etherland for joining in and being here as well. That means the world to me as well. And so I think at this point,
Yes.
this wraps up the official part of the launch, and now we can all just eat cake. Okay. Be well and well read.